welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing a topic that we've kind of touched on in the past around sort of playing multiple sports and the rule of one-to-one. So we'll get stuck into it. In your opinion, why does sport break athletes down?
I think we should look at sport as a stress. So we've got, the physical, obviously the load of doing, sport and exercise, and we've got also the psychological stress, which we probably shouldn't underestimate. Stress can be a good thing because, we all understand that if you stress something, then if it adapts to it, it then technically gets stronger, and as a result, we get better, we get more resilient. It's a bit like, being exposed to bugs and getting a cold and stuff, your immune system gets stronger, and then hopefully you don't get as sick from then on. Which is why things like, your load management and that sort of stuff is really important, which is obviously what we're discussing here when kids do multiple sports. Where I think a lot get it wrong is, too much. So there's, back-to-back sports on the same day. There's, even back-to-back games on a weekend. There's just really congested training weeks between juggling lots of different sports. And I think it all comes from the right place in that we want kids to be busy and active, and we want to give our kids opportunities. But if we don't get the balance right, we have the opposite effect, and we'll burn kids out. We see injuries, and then we see high dropout rates, typically at 16, 17. And hopefully after today, we can maybe educate some of the athletes and parents to maybe avoid some of those mistakes, because it's hard in the moment. You think you're doing the right thing, but then, almost gets to the point where it's too late, and looking back, I wish we did things a bit different.
And that's really, it is hard from a parent's perspective because they probably don't have the education around it and they sort of don't know any better. But I guess why are they potentially, without knowing, but setting their kid up for failure by letting them play sort of multiple sports on the weekend, back-to-back games on Saturday, back-to-back games on Sunday, travelling, all that kind of thing?
The first thing that comes to mind is kids are pretty smart, and if they know there's lots happening, they automatically start to switch to survival mode, and now it's a pacing kind of strategy to get through. If they're playing Saturday morning and they already know they're going to go and do something Saturday afternoon, or they got footy again tomorrow, or soccer, or whatever it is, then it makes sense to be like, well, if I just hold back a bit today, I'll be right for tomorrow. But now they're not getting the same improvement in the moment. So as a result, they, like I said, they sort of pace. We see it with our stuff. Like some kids, they mention, I've got to go to this after. And it's like, you just see that their mind is somewhere else, their efforts somewhere else, because they're already worried about the next thing, and they're not, right there in the moment trying to get the most out of what they should be doing. And I guess linking to that sort of stress idea, in that the physical stress on muscles, on tendons, on joints, bones, and growth plates, which obviously is a big one that we see in our population. But as well, things like, hormone development and the immune system. Kids that aren't developing at the rate we would like, they're getting sick constantly. A lot of the time, it's actually to do with the stress, whether that, like I said, is physical or psychological, but the body's not coping. We want thriving kids. We want them to develop into really confident, high-performing adults, strong, resilient bodies. But if we push them too far, we essentially create the opposite.
And so we've kind of, touched on it in the past with the one-to-one rule, but just for maybe new listeners or whatever, can you sort of explain that sort of one-to-one rule and why it is so important?
Yeah. We'll touch on our phase a little bit, but once kids sort of get to that high school age with us and they start to really learn how to train, the one-to-one rule is a guide to balance all their preparation and recovery work to match what they're doing in their sport. So basically across a week, you can add up all the sport training and all the games that they're doing into a lump sum. So say it's 10 hours a week between training 3 nights a week and a game on the weekend. What we suggest is you should be at least trying to match those hours one-to-one in terms of their gym, their stretching work, any of their recovery work specific. So things like, time in their compression boots or massage guns, or, getting a massage, so that we're trying to balance some of the stress in to some of the kind of recovery out the other side. And people will look at gym and say, well, isn't that more load? It's like, well, it's very control load, and we do it in a way that we're actually trying to create really small amounts of stress into really specific areas so that we offset a lot of the damage that sport creates.
So where do you kind of think that misconception sort of comes from, where gym, yes, the devil's in the detail, but I feel like it gets sort of blanketed in terms of it's bicep curls, it's heavy squats, it's all these kind of different exercises, which just isn't the case. So why do you think parents kind of are so worried about their kid doing gym, but yet are still happy for them to play multiple sports on the weekend plus train every night of the week?
There's probably two sides of it. The first one is I 100% agree with parents. Like, I won't let my kid go to an open gym because seeing what goes on in there, it is dangerous and it's stupid and it's a waste of time. So yeah, and this is even supervised coach stuff. Like, it's understanding what the gym is, or what fitness is. So whether you're going CrossFit or powerlifting or 24/7 model, a lot of them are designed either from a business perspective or off the back of like a sport like CrossFit. So they're not designed for footballers, because CrossFit is brutal and it's designed that way because it is the ultimate, the fittest on earth. If you weren't playing footy, it might be a great thing for you to go and do, but probably not for a developing body where they need the right stimulus at the right time and a whole heap of that background work. So I understand it and I agree with it to a big degree. The challenge, I think, is then just lumping all gym in, including us, because there are people like what we do, and there's other versions of it out there where they are athlete performance environments with the goal of actually making our athletes better. And I think a lot of this comes from research that doesn't exist, and people being misquoted saying that gym resistance training can create growth defects and or stunt growth and this sort of stuff, which we know is 100% false. If anything, it only helps growth and development. It's just got to be done in the right way, and that's probably the challenge. Is 90 to 95% of the time, it probably does more harm than good because it's not done properly.
And so with us and sort of our model and the way that we kind of go about sort of training, I guess, athletes and their athlete development, how would you say that we're different in terms of what we focus on and our philosophies?
Yeah, well, it probably is easiest to answer that by breaking down the kind of like a young athlete's journey. So if you think of that primary school age, then I'm all for, things like play, fun, skill development. And a lot of that is done in sports, because a lot of sports set up, their younger age groups, like Auskick for footy, and different tennis and basketball programs. I forget the names of all them, but they do all their skill-based, sort of fun participation, which is great for kids to try different sports, to learn what they like as well as what they're good at. And I think they're two different conversations, and then probably a quick touch on this with parents and athletes. Kids will naturally be drawn to what they are good at and is fun, but they're not always going to both be present. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's where I think our jobs as parents is to let kids do things they enjoy, but sometimes you'll notice that they're actually pretty good at this, but they maybe don't like it. And it might be more like the social side of it is the issue, or, they had one negative experience, and kids aren't obviously great long-term thinkers. And that's where I think it's our job as parents, maybe to keep trying to encourage them and keep maybe trying to see a season out, because you just never know what they become. And sometimes they actually quit the sport that they actually really talented and really suits them for something that they do that they're maybe not as good at, but it's fun because they're doing it with their friends. So I think there's a bit of a balance there. But once they get into that sort of high school age, that's typically when we say we start working with kids, other than a few rare exceptions. But because to me, that's where they're starting to really learn how to train. And I think this is where it's important that parents understand the difference between now playing and the success on the weekend versus actually trying to set your week up. And this is where I'd say Monday to Friday, from especially years 7 to 10, is more important than Saturday and Sunday. Because now they've got to really learn what it takes to be an athlete. And this is where they got to start to spend more time in and around their specific movement skills away from the sport, to really harness what the sport maybe isn't giving them and work on some of their strengths and weaknesses. We look at, from our point of view, a lot of that really specific coordination type stuff, whether it's balance, whether it's, like our switching action, a lot of our pelvic control stuff. That's where that fits in, which obviously, sport on its own isn't always going to help with. If anything, maybe stress it and show where you're not good at it, and speed. So yes, you can run fast in your sport, but in terms of the hardware and the software that we've spoken about before, taking you out of the sport to actually develop that is what I think will set up a lot of kids for really long and successful careers. And then probably that sort of back end of high school, so that year 11, 12, 17, 18 is where I would say learning to train turns into a bit more learning to compete. So now they've set their week up. Now it's about, yes, you've got that box ticked, you're doing that really well. How do we now transfer that and really drill down so that now you learn how to compete in your training so that you can compete on the weekend. This is where they start to get probably into like a bit more hyper-focused on one sport, and really have to learn how to minimise distraction, so really maximise the skill of saying no, which we've spoken about, because if by this point they're going pretty well, they're talented, they're going to be asked to do a lot of different things, they've got to be able to say no so that they can actually focus on what their goal is, and whether it's NBA, WNBA, getting drafted, pro tennis, Australian swim squads, state national teams in whatever their sport is, then that takes a lot of sacrifice, which takes a lot of saying no to other things that are going to potentially take them away from their goal. At that 7 to 10 age, I don't mind them still playing a couple of different sports, but the key there is one priority per season. So any sport that overlaps, you've got to be really clear on, this is footy season the goal. I can do a little bit of basketball, for example, but as long as it doesn't take away from footy. I don't think you can do both well. It's just being really clear on your priorities. And the difference for the primary school age kids is you can have probably multiple sports overlapping because it's about play and skills and fun. All I would say is you just don't do more than one sport on the same day. So it goes from same day to same season to probably one sport.
And so for the primary school kids more so, when should they sort of looking at starting some gym or kind of what we do?
It's probably in that sort of rehab gym type space if there's a glaring issue. So obviously a lot of our growth related problems, if they've had a serious injury like a broken arm, broken leg, or a bad joint sprain, something where this is going to take some deliberate effort to get over this. Typically, we might take some kids sometimes like year 5, some year 6 kids if they're a bit more like early developer, really switched on, really good kids. And typically they're some of the kids that are in those individual sports from our experience. Your swimming kids, gymnastics, tennis, athletics, just because they're very aware, and I think they're maturity-wise, they're ready to learn how to train. Whereas a lot of the other kids, they might think they're ready, the parents might think they're ready, but they're still looking at what we do as fun. And I want kids to come in, obviously enjoy what they do, but they don't come to us because, we're babysitting them or, they need something to do that's fun. Like I push our kids pretty hard, even young, and my thing is it's a bit like, playing senior footy at 16, you're on the senior field. So you get treated as a senior footballer. If you come in our facility, I treat you like an athlete. Understand they're at different levels, but I expect you to be able to concentrate, follow instructions, put your program in the app, do all that stuff, because that's what athletes need to do.